NBA career. However, despite the Raptors' all-time leading score of 13,296 points, and leading point producer in each of the last 3 seasons from 2016 to 2018, there was a genuine sentiment among some that the Raptors had maximized their potential with the initial core group, and management needed to make a change. Despite reaching the NBA playoffs for 5 straight years, from 2014 to 18, the Raptors did not do much damage in them. Only once in that span did they even reach the Eastern Conference Finals, and in 3 of those years, simply were outmatched by LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. The acquisition of Leonard was significantly because the Raptors had acquired a 2-time NBA Defensive Player of the Year, the 2014 NBA Finals Most Valuable Player, and the 2-time NBA All-Star with the Spurs. Leonard was a completely different player than DeRozan because he was considered a better all-around player with more defensive skills. There was also risk involved as Leonard was injured most of last year and would be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the 2018 and 19 NBA regular season. There was initial speculation that Leonard would be with the Raptors for this season before going to his hometown of Los Angeles and joining the Clippers. For the entire season, Leonard has indicated that he is focused on 2018 and 19 and 2018 and 19 only. He knows that he has a decision to make at the end of the season. And with this decision, some basketball fans either in Canada or Southern California will be devastated. But in the process, it is time now for basketball fans in Canada to celebrate the present. Leonard and shooting guard Danny Green have simply had excellent seasons and silenced the critics. Leonard has been the team MVP as he led the Raptors in the regular season with 1,596 points, 560 field goals, and 364 free throws, and 106 steals. Green, meanwhile, had 821 points, and led the Raptors in points from beyond the arc with 198. Both have been instrumental in why the Raptors are only 2 wins away, 1 win away now, from winning their first NBA title in franchise history. The Toronto Blue Jays in 1980, meanwhile, were similar to what the Raptors were in 2018. They had won 99 games in 1985 and lost the American League Championship Series to the Kansas City Royals in a tight 7-game series. 2 years later, in 1987, they were the second best team in all of baseball, but did not make the playoffs because they went ice cold in the final week of the regular season and lost the division title to the Detroit Tigers. In 1989, the Blue Jays won the American League East and lost to the Oakland Athletics in the ALCS before finishing second to the Boston Red Sox in the AL East in 1990. There is no doubt that Tony Fernandez had been a fan favorite for the Blue Jays in the 1980s, known for his excellent defensive capabilities. Fernandez was a 3-time All-Star for the Blue Jays 1986, 1987, 1989. And the shortstop led Major League Baseball with 17 triples in 1990. Fred McGriff, meanwhile, was one of Major League Baseball's best hitting first basemen as he led the American League with 36 home runs and a .924 on base and slugging percentage in 1989. What the Blue Jays got with Roberto Alomar and Joe Carter, however, was extra special. Carter and Alomar would each be a 5-time All-Star for the Blue Jays, while Alomar would go on to be the first Blue Jays player to represent Toronto and Cooperstown. Alomar could also be considered one of the best defensive second basemen to ever play Major League Baseball. From an offensive standpoint, Alomar hit a significant home run off Oakland Athletics closer Dennis Eckersley in the Blue Jays ALCS win in 1992. The Blue Jays would go on to beat the Athletics and then the Atlanta Braves for their first World Series in franchise history. Then a year later, Carter hit a walk-off home run to give the Blue Jays their second World Series title in 2 years with a 8-6 Toronto win over Philadelphia. The bottom line was simple. Blue Jays general manager Pat Gillick was not afraid to help make a good Blue Jays team into a great one. Over the next week, it'll be interesting to see if Ujiri's offseason blockbuster trade will provide the same dividends for the Raptors. No other professional sport on planet Earth is more defined and illuminated by statistics than Major League Baseball. As the professional game celebrates its 150th anniversary this year, it's important to note that there's also a rich history of baseball statistics. The timeline runs from the early 19th century baseball to the first professional team, then the 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings, right up to the game's 21st century information-driven franchises. There are a number of brilliant and impactful people in the game's history who have looked at MLB stats in revolutionary ways. The result of their work has forever altered our understanding and increased our enjoyment of professional baseball. Whether they worked for teams, wrote for newspapers, or authored paradigm-changing books, the following 5 stat cats define the evolution of MLB statistics. Henry Boxscore Chadwick. All discussion of baseball stats begin with a respectful bow to the British-born sports writer Henry Chadwick, born in 1824, passed away in 1908. While covering cricket for the New York Times in 1856, Chadwick happened to see his first baseball game, a contest between the New York Eagles and the Gothams at Elysian Fields in Hoboken, New Jersey. Chadwick would devote the rest of his life to the game's development and history. In 1859, he devised the box score to record player runs, hits, putouts, and assists. He also created earned run average and batting average to better measure individual player performance. But my favorite Chadwick creation was the abbreviation K to denote a strikeout. The use of the letter K for a strikeout is obviously intuitive, but for some reason has routinely baffled casual fans over 3 different centuries. Sadly, there is little information about who exactly created the reverse K to know that the batter was out on a called third strike. Popular history traces it to Mets fans in the 1980s who began posting K signs at Shea Stadium when Dwight Gooden was pitching and began reversing the K on called strikeouts. Ernie Lanigan orders up some ribeyes. The RBI emerged in 1879 when a local newspaper tabulated RBIs for the National League's Buffalo Bisons. The Chicago Tribune did the same in 1880 for the White Stockings, but it didn't stick because some fans felt that leadoff hitters were disadvantaged in accumulating RBIs. The RBI stat was officially adopted by Major League Baseball in 1920, primarily because it had been championed for years by sports writer, editor, and historian Ernie Lanigan, born in 1873, passed away in 1962. While writing for various publications from 1907 to 1919, Lanigan laboriously tabulated runs batted in and caught stealing numbers for New York's teams and lobbied incessantly to get the National League to add the RBI to their official stats list. The RBI rule was initially enacted in 1920, but was so poorly defined that Major League Baseball had to revisit the rule in 1931 and more precisely classify how hitters were awarded an RBI. Despite the problems with the intrinsic value of RBI, there is a current movement among sabermetric writers and researchers to have a pre-1920 RBI added to historic player career statistics. Babe Ruth, for example, is credited with 1,990 RBIs from 1920 to the end of his career in 1935. But research has shown that Ruth knocked in 224 runs from the start of his career in 1914 through 1919. So Ruth's actual career RBI total should be 2,214. Why this oversight isn't being officially corrected by Major League Baseball is ridiculous on a grand level. Can we get us some replay on this issue? Side note, I should note at this point that it is now generally accepted that RBIs are a distracting and inaccurate measure of individual player performance. For a hitter to get an RBI, players not only need to be on base, they must also be in scoring position. Plus, the range or lack of range of defensive players and whether they have a good arm or a bad arm often determines whether or not a batter gets an RBI. Back to Ernie Lanigan. Lanigan was first to track caught stealing stats, which were also officially recognized by Major League Baseball in 1920. The American League began tabulating the stat for every game, but for some reason, caught stealing was not adopted as an official stat by the National League until 1951. Another side note. The first player in MLB history to be caught stealing 4 times in one game was second baseman Robbie Thompson. of the San Francisco Giants in a game against the Cincinnati Reds on June 27, 1986. The Reds catcher that day was Bo Diaz, and Giants won that 12-inning contest 7-6. Catching the entire 12 innings for San Francisco was Bob Melvin, now manager of the Oakland A's. The Reds lineup featured Pete Rose, Dave Parker, Dave Concepcion, and Tony Perez. FC Lane spreads the word, and the word is good. Ferdinand Cole Lane, born in 1896, passed in 1984, was the brilliant and highly opinionated writer-editor of Baseball Magazine from 1912 to 1937. Born in Minnesota and a graduate of Boston University, Lane waged essentially a one-man war against the baseball's mindless traditional statistics, which he felt hid the game's true greatness. In particular, Lane condemned the batting average as worse than worthless. The idea of counting doubles, triples, and home runs as the same as a single made no sense to him, and he crusaded for decades against its use. He also devised several versions of runs created by putting a value on each base reached, and worked on a run probability predictor based on the number of outs and men on base. FC Lane pioneered examining stadium effects on hitting and pitching, listing which pitchers had the best control and which hitters were the easiest to strike out. After his career in baseball journalism, Lane created a whole new life as a college history professor and extensive world traveler. In thinking about FC Lane, there's little doubt he would have felt completely at home holding court at the annual Sabre Analytics Conference. Alan Roth, asking questions and getting answers. Perhaps the most impactful influence on our understanding of inside baseball came from statistician Alan Roth. 1972 was born, 1917, died in 1992, who worked for the Brooklyn/Los Angeles Dodgers from 1947 to 1964. Roth was hired by baseball's preeminent executive intellect, Brooklyn Dodgers president and GM Branch Rickey, born in 1881, passed away in 1965. After Roth repeatedly pestered Rickey with new statistical concepts he said would allow the Dodgers to win more baseball games, carefully tracking pitcher and hitter tendencies, Roth preached would open up a new universe of proprietary advantages for the Dodgers. Rickey eventually hired Roth in 1947 at a salary of $5,000 a year, and he became the first full-time statistician ever employed by a major league club. For the next 17 years, every pitch thrown by a Dodgers pitcher was recorded and tracked, and detailed hitter spray charts were created. Roth and Rickey quickly bonded over their mutual agreement that on-base percentage was the game's most critically overlooked statistic, and that RBIs were a false indicator of hitting talent. They also shared a passion for questioning traditionally accepted assumptions about how Major League Baseball should be played and managed. Alan Roth created the equation, a legendary combination of on-base percentage and isolated power, plus run scoring, pitching, and fielding that measured player performance more precisely than any existing stat. Other Roth innovations included making situational pitcher and hitter scenarios, righty versus lefty, day game versus night game, home away games, stadium effects, etc., part of the game's on-field strategy for the first time in MLB history. Roth also formalized the concept of a pitching save. He began tracking saves in 1951 and did so until Chicago Sun-Times sports writer Jerome Holtzman revamped Roth's save definition in 1960 and pushed to have his version made an official MLB stat. The save was adopted by baseball in 1969. Bill James, asking questions and extracting astounding answers. Bill James took the concept of examining traditional assumptions and asking pointed questions about quantifiable performance to a higher, more intellectually rigorous level. Major League Baseball has traditionally been a closed, backward-looked institution more fiercely dedicated to defending long-held beliefs rather than examining them. The historic examples of FC Lane and Alan Roth were quickly and happily forgotten as the baseball establishment closed ranks and continued to value untested doctrine over exploring potential alternatives to achieve greater on-field success. And Bill James's challenges to accepted ways of thinking about professional baseball led the way to value